Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm going to introduce our speaker today, and I'll allow her to expand on her. She comes with a lot of experience, and I'll allow her to speak on that herself. But this is Kathy McKitka, and she will be presenting for you today. She's both a parent and also a professional. She's also the project manager at the set at the Mind Institute. So welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So, as she said, I work at the Mind Institute. So one of my colleagues is Patty Shetter. So I know about Captain, I hear about Captain all the time, but this is the first time I've been privileged to be at a summit for Captain, and it's so impressive, and I just love, and I've run into people that I've known over the years, personally and professionally, so that's the perk already. I feel like I'm ahead, and I haven't even presented. So, she's right that I do have a daughter, Megan, who is 35 now. She has significant disabilities with a diagnosis of cerebral palsy and communication disorder and resiliency issues, but she lives a very meaningful life with lots of support in her community. So the whole concept of supported decision making, I have a personal stake in, and the decision to make a conservatorship or not, and looking at how you approach transition from high school to adult life. I've been practicing that now for about 14 years. She stayed in high school till she was 22. So that will weave into some of what we talk about. And then my job at the Mind Institute is to coordinate family support. So I do things like we have a medical school module where we train fourth-year medical students in understanding what it's like to live a life with a disability and what families need, what kinds of community supports there are, in hopes that, you know, as doctors, they will see the world with a little broader view when they go out there and start to practice. And I also work on the Family Navigator project, where we are helping families navigate that medical system when they first get a diagnosis. So we do, and then of course everybody at Mind does lots of other things, but those are really my two most important projects that I have a leadership role in. And then I have started teaming with Steve Reuter from the Mind Institute on this grant that we have around supported decision making, looking at alternatives to conservatorship, looking at what self-determination does, because Steve's job at the Mind is to run the transition from high school to adulthood and all the various and the sundry things that can be connected with it. So as I start, I want to acknowledge that Steve did this PowerPoint and had intended to be here, had intended to present this in Southern California, but he got prevented in Southern California because the fires came and the summit didn't happen. But I have to say, he's on a cruise to Hawaii now, so I'm really hoping for an umbrella drink when he gets back, because I am taking his PowerPoint and going to share it with you. So there will be resources at the end, so if there's things that spark your interest and we don't have time to go into depth about them, but you want to contact us, the contact information is there. We're really committed in this grant project that we have to look at the conversation. I'm not here today to say conservatorship is good or bad, that supported decision making is better or not. We want to look at the fact that oftentimes families, when they get to the age of their children get to the age of 18, they don't think there are any other alternatives, and they're afraid of not being a voice in tandem with their children that have the capacity to give voice to their decisions, and so they oftentimes push themselves into a conservatorship maybe sooner than they need to, and maybe they don't need to do it at all. So really the intent of speaking at Captain and other places is to be a forum for the conversation to come. I know that when we were making a decision for my daughter in transition in high school, we didn't do it, we put it off, but there wasn't a lot of people that you could go and seek information out. So we're really committed to finding out what we don't know, what we need to learn, and how we can all make the system a little better so that families feel like they have choice. Because once you have choice, then everything seems just a little bit better. Whether your choice is different from mine and from hers, at least we can look at it differently. So You have the PowerPoint, and the handout I know was on the Captain website. You also have the poster that Steve and I created that we presented at the AUCD conference in Washington, D.C. And so we're going to just try to blend all of that information so that we can have a conversation around it. So we're really looking at new opportunities and how to examine what conservatorship truly means. Because as we started to unravel and meet with other professionals, that we realized that a lot of us had some real misconceptions about what conservatorship was. We thought that it meant X, Y, and Z, but really it meant A, B, and C. So we want to look at and share with you some of the resources that we came upon, some of the conversations we've had, and then I know that you'll all go back and think with the people that you trust most to know how you're going to incorporate it into the work that you're doing. So conservatorship for people with developmental disabilities, there historically have always been two types of conservatorship. There's the conservatorship of the person, and then there's the conservatorship of the estate, which means the financial means which surrounds the individual with a disability. Historically, most people were really focused on the financial part and how, like, the services that were given to them and the money that they might have as a family would be protected, and how could they do that, who would make the decisions about that, how the money was spent, how the services were accessed over time. But more recently, we have seen in the state of California and nationally that conservatorship of the person is happening more than it did in the past. So that's one of the things that we want to think about together. So, conservatorship is a legal process, and it's where the court looks at the individual that comes in front of them and their support system, and looks at the fact that if due to a medical condition or a physical condition, a person is unable to do certain things. And those things include managing their finances responsibly so that the money doesn't run out or the services don't happen. It talks about care for your physical health so that you can live a life that with longevity if possible, that where you're healthy and you're accessing all the things in your world that would contribute to making you healthy. And also about providing for food, for clothing, and shelter. So those are the things that conservatorship and people that make that decision are going to manage for the adult with a disability. If conservatorship is granted, you can see that it takes away most of a person's rights to choose on most any topic. So it is very all-consuming, a full conservatorship. So it's legally saying in front of court, and then to all the people that come into a person's life after that, that they were too incapacitated to make these decisions themselves. So there's also in California and in other states a process called limited conservatorship. And that is something that a lot of people are looking at as well. And in this process, you don't have to take away all 7 rights of the individual, the adult with a disability. You could look at what is it that they really can't manage on their own, and then you can ask the court to have protection over those parts of a person's life. So they would be things like an issue about whether they determine where they live. Are they going to live with their family forever? Are they going to live in a group home? Are they going to do supported living? Having access to confidential records, whether they can get married or not get married, how they would enter into contracts or not enter into contracts, whether they can give consent for medical treatment and medical interventions. It would be their sexuality and their choices around sexual behavior. And then if they're young enough, it's still about making those educational decisions. And are they going to stay in high school till they're 22? Are they going to go to a workability type of program? Are they going to go to supported employment? What kinds of things and education settings and opportunities during those transition years would they want to weigh in and do. So this is a mechanism, this limited conservatorship is a way to preserve some rights for adults with disabilities. Unfortunately though, oftentimes when people go in front of the court, it's like it becomes an all or nothing. You know, the court says, well, we're going to give you conservatorship over all 7. So that is something we really weren't aware, that there are more full conservatorships than there are limited ones. So in a full conservatorship, it gives the person who is named as the conservator really all the rights and really full authority over that person to make all the decisions for the conservatee. Now, we're not saying that that's a bad thing in some cases, because that can be a teamwork, it can be a family that has a great circle of support, and it really is joint, you know, caring and thinking about the person. But in some cases, it doesn't stay with the family and stay with the people that you start the conservatorship with, and we will talk a little bit about that. In full conservatorship, though, in California and nationwide, there are some things that they cannot be in charge of, and they are things like controlling the wages of a job. The conservator doesn't have charge of that. They can't recommend harmful medical treatment for a person, some things like electric shock treatment. They don't have the power to decide that that's something that the conservatee needs. They can't authorize psychotherapy. They cannot force medication therapy on the conservatee, and they can't commit someone to an institution. So there are some safeguards, there are some things that is not theirs to decide. But most everything else in day-to-day decision making would be the responsibility of the conservator. So in our research and in meeting with people like from the ACLU and from San Francisco State and other places that are doing research a lot around transition and conservatorship, we saw that there were certain beliefs that families came into the process with that may not really be accurate, but we didn't know that at the time. And there are things like families are presented with conservatorship as really, it's sort of a benign tool. You know, that you do it because it's part of the process of when your child reaches a certain age and you know they have significant disabilities and you know that they're going to need support. So they love their children, they want to help be advocates for their children, so they think that it's not that big a deal. They also think that the family, whoever they choose as a designee for the conservatorship, will be that person forever. And they don't realize that that could change. They think, you know, we're going to make a decision and either mom or dad are going to do it, or the sister is going to do it, or aunt so-and-so is going to do it, and that's the way it's going to be. They've mapped it out for years and years and years. But that's not a guarantee that it will stay that way. And they think that conservatorship is a safety net so that when they need to intervene, it's available, they have that tool, and they can use it. But what they don't know or aren't told or in the past is that if somebody dies, like say the mom and dad are conservators of their son or daughter, if the mom or dad were to die, then you have to go back to court because now the plan has changed, and it doesn't necessarily go to the person that you want to choose to replace dad or to replace mom or to replace your sister or whoever it might be. Also, all families don't stay intact for the whole life of a child with a disability. So if there's a divorce and you have to go back and relook at the plan, there's not a guarantee that what you think is the best plan is what the judge and the court will say, we agree with you, just go home and move forward. So we know that families really want their loved ones to be independent, and they're looking at conservatorship as a safety net for them. But what we want you to think about is that maybe there are other safety nets and other processes, especially with adults with disabilities that have greater capacity, that we could maybe talk about as a consideration. So So Steve went to a workshop that was put on by lawyers that were advocating for conservatorship. And so, that's their business. They're in the process of helping families to get all this information, but their buy-in is that you're going to say yes and you're going to use them to create and do all the documents and go to court with you and end up, as conservator of the person that you love. So he added a couple slides to just sort of show you what the message can be when it may be a little biased that conservatorship is the best answer, and we're really not talking about the alternatives. That, your child reaches 18, you have no power, you have to do this conservatorship so that you can protect and move your child forward in the world you hope to define for them. Also, here was another slide from the same workshop that he went to, where it's talking about if they're not capable of anything. It's kind of like the flight attendant model where, you put your oxygen mask on, and then put your child's mask on. It's like, if they can't appreciate the situation at all, then the recommendation is general or a full conservatorship, that you take away all of the 7 categories and you are in charge for all those decisions. They do talk a little bit about limited conservatorship, and that maybe 2 out of the 7 are not necessary for your individual with a disability to be conserved in. And then there's the component, but they don't really give a lot of facts and details about, is that they can see that the adult with a disability can make decisions, and so they suggest things like power of attorney, where you share a document and more than one person signs a decision-making process, whatever it might be. So this is a slide that talks a little bit about what we think happens for families all too often. What messages do they receive when they're out there trying to gather this information? And so Steve found, and it really is an interesting link, and it is on this slide, and it's in your PowerPoint that you can link to. He found some really good pieces of information about when your child with an IEP turns 18, and what are your parental rights. And he feels like it lays it out pretty succinctly. It's something that you could look through and take parts of and use with your families if you're part of that group of people that are helping families look at what's next. What is it that I need to do in order for things to happen the way we plan for our child. It was written, this document, for attorneys, but it really is digestible for everybody. Yes?
I'm just going to say that link isn't working.
Oh, okay. Thank you for checking that. Okay, I will check that when I get back, and I will have Patty send out whatever we did wrong in the slides and not.
Because I'm guessing it'd be a great handout for parents.
Yes, that's what Steve was hoping. So, okay, let me check into that. And
is it put out by the state bar?
I am not sure.
Yeah,
It may be
online if you look up California State Bar.
Okay, thanks. That's really helpful. Okay. So it really, and I think the reason Steve likes it so much is it really gives parents the idea that you really need to do a lot of thinking around it and not be rushed into the decision. I mean, so often people are just really pressured at 18. This is when you need to decide if you're going to come to the IEP in 3 months and your child is over 18, you can't be there. That's not the case at all. So it really has a lot of good tips. Yes.
I work for a regional center, and I've actually had, it's been a little while, but I have had a couple of people from other agencies like CCS call me and say, well, I know that you automatically conserve an 18-year-old, so I've been sharing that information with parents. I'm like, whoa,
right.
Hold the phone, So, and anyway, so I mean,
yes.
That information comes to them not just from education.
Oh, absolutely.
But from other agencies as well.
Right, it's a whole culture out
And
there that
education
automatically,
needs to
and then the
big.
first to blame, of course, because where is the child most often at 18 still in education? Education gets the slap of you're the ones that do it all. But it comes to families in a lot
Medical.
of different places because people know just a little bit about it. And we felt we knew a little bit more about it, but we are learning a lot more about it now. And it really wasn't talked about, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It was just sort of like that kind of automatic response. You're 18, this is what happens.
Currently on the Often Speaks website, state by state, there's advice for parents, and the advice for parents under state of California for transition includes start your guardianship, conservatorship paperwork.
6 months. Right.
6 months before the person turns 18. It's on the Often Speaks
Right,
website.
it is showing up everywhere, and that's why the ACLU has taken such a big stance on trying to get the information out there. And then we did a grant at the Mind Institute because we really feel committed to educating people about all their options. And Disability Rights of California is doing some work around it. The State Council is now partnering with us, and they will be doing some trainings. The Family Resource Centers are getting involved so that we can really look at not convincing people one way or the other, because we all know choices have to fit. They have to be a goodness of fit for the people that are making them, but you should know that you have more than one than an automatic press the button, you're 18, and the regional center will do it for you. And you won't, and we know that. Okay, other comments before I move on? Yes.
I have one comment. I think that there's, it assumes that, there's a lot of assumptions, I think, made in conservatorship, which is that the parents have the best intentions, and so there's that assumption, but also that they know what's best.
Right.
So, but I think it goes awry at times. I mean, in practice, I'm going to use graphic language, but we just had a meeting with a family who did not want their adult male son to masturbate appropriately in private. And so he has wounds on his penis that are not healing. Oh, I can't breathe, sorry guys. Anyway, he has wounds on his penis that are not healing. And we said to the care provider, why aren't you providing him with a lubricant? Because that's the obvious answer to us. And the answer is because the parents are the conservators and they don't want him masturbating. And so these are the kind of things that in practice we run against. And so then he has a staph infection, then he takes antibiotics, and it's like, well, so I wanted to point out that side too.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's one of the whole principles in supported decision making, is that it's not just the parents, or it's not just one person over here. It's a team of people looking at it, having conversations. And as they said in the Hot Topics this morning, I think that's what it was called, and we're big advocates. I went to a national conference a couple years ago when I was doing early childhood work, but they were advocating for self-determination, and that in preschool, just like was said this morning, where people are often very isolated when they have a child with a disability, and a lot is put on their shoulders, and they don't build a group of support to think with. They know a little, but they could know so much more if they shared their child and shared the thinking about their child with other people, and whether it's people that they consider chosen friends and family, or people that are in the service industry that interact with their child. But we all need support. I mean, we think about if we have parents that are aging, and then we as siblings or as people that care about a person, you sit down and you talk about like what's best. Is it assisted living? Is it bringing care into the house? Is it whatever? These big decisions need lots of thinking around it, and a way to access as much information as possible, so you feel like you made an informed choice, not just a choice. And those are a lot of the stories that we hear, on this side, and then we hear stories of, families that really care and want, but the court assigns someone else, and they're really not in that day-to-day thinking with their child. So it is really, really big. And one of the things when I was working in early childhood, like we really, and that we really encouraged families to look at that whole thing, like circle of friends, circle of support, person-centered planning, to get practice of that, of who can think with me, who cares enough to go the distance and to weigh in. And sometimes people are in that circle of support because they're your best fourth grade teacher ever and they really care and they're going to make a difference. Or it's your sister who's still with you 30 years later and listens to you when you're trying to solve something really big. There's lots of ways to build it. But if you don't ever do that and then you're aging and you have a child with a disability that's an adult and you just make these isolated decisions because you don't have enough information, all too often they're not the best decisions. So, yes.
To make another comment, and that is that I think that sometimes people think that the conservatorship is more powerful than it is.
Right.
For instance, somebody who wants to date somebody else and whose parents have, or conservator has all 7 powers, well, she's still gonna date him. And there's not a whole lot that piece of paper is gonna do for anybody. So at least that's been my experience.
Right. And you'll see in some of the literature, they'll talk about the bubble wrap that people think they've put around their children by having conservatorship. And really, for some things that are really important to you as a family, it's not the safety net you were hoping for. You don't, because you care and you think, oh, if I have a conservatorship, then abuse won't happen to my child, bad decisions won't get made. That's not the case. It's a piece of paper. It's a court-ordered. There can be ways to go back and do things differently, but it's not, you're not wrapping them up and protecting them day in and day out. There have to be a myriad of safeguards in order, checks and balances for that to happen. You're next, go.
In sort of the talking to parents and all of that, have you found that parents run up against once a student turns 18 in terms of medical, the physicians, the communication stops?
Right.
So is there, because I know in my experience, that's where a lot of our parents have seeked conservatorship because of that.
Right.
Is this supported decision making a way around the HIPAA?
Right, that is the hope and the intention. And that's what, there's a controversy around supported decision making. Should it be legislated or should it be just formalized and a document, kind of like a power of attorney document, and that you could take it with you? But that whole who makes a medical decision after 18 and the HIPAA laws and access to that really is oftentimes what prompts families to be able to do it. So currently, some people in some states, like the state of Texas, it's formalized and you can use it to be able to make those joint decisions, to call and make a medical appointment for your child. That isn't the case yet, like the formalized part here in California, but you can get a power of attorney or other things that will allow you to make those joint decision makings that would give you time to decide, do I still want to go the conservatorship route? Do I want to do more supported decision making and have it formalized? Do I want to look at other alternatives and make a mix of things? One of the things we hope is that people won't be pressured that 18 is the only time you can think about, do this, and act upon it. Because there's a slide that's further on that we'll talk about, is that you think about it, 18, somebody with a disability, or even someone without a disability, what they look like at 18 and who they are at 25, you don't recognize them. So, it's a really big responsibility to think that you can define capacity of someone at 18. And oftentimes that comes because they haven't had the same amount of practice making decisions as maybe a typical person. They haven't made the decision about driving yet, the decision about dating, the decision about getting a part-time or a full-time job. All those kinds of yes, no, think about what are the consequences decisions haven't happened, but maybe 10 years out, they have enough that you can look at, this is what we think will be the best plan. Okay, someone over here had a question, yes?
Yeah. I guess what I'm concerned with, it seems more black and white and darker gray with the students who are more challenged on the spectrum. But I struggle with my students who are higher functioning, they're college bound, they're getting their diploma. So I have a two-part question about that population. First, is it more difficult to get them even limited conservatorship when they've earned a diploma? And two, when I look at the criteria for conservatorship, they're pretty basic. And so we look at these high-functioning college graduate, 4-year college-bound spectrum guys, And once they leave the protective environment of high school, they don't have the mental health, they don't have the functionality, they don't have the social skills, which puts them at risk. And yet my concern is that they wouldn't even be considered for a limited conservatorship.
Correct. And that is being looked at. That's a conversation that's always part of the conversation and a concern for people, because looking at capacity, those are, individuals with demonstrated capacity. They made it through high school, they made it through college, they may have a successful job. And so where do the protections need to continue? What are the things that are still really hard for them? And is there a way to do it without? And what we're also discovering and finding is that, just like so many things, it depends upon which judge you go in front of. It depends upon who's advocating, right, on either side of having it or not having it, that has historically in the past determined it. So I don't have a complete answer for you, but I can tell you that that's a concern that people are looking at.
And it's accurate that they would be less likely to be considered for conservatorship if they have their diploma.
You would think so, but I'm not going to say across the board that that is right, because I think that there are just too many variables at the moment, and not enough safeguards, and not enough information for the people that would be considering doing that conservatorship to do it with the best practices.
The person with high functioning autism is speaking themselves. The person with communication deficit, despite having very normal intelligence and every other thing going for them, would be more likely to get conservatorship because of their physical and obvious needs.
Do you think judges are very conservative on conservatorship?
Right.
It's really demonstrate that there's a lack of initiative on their part.
Right.
And so if the rise of autism, changes the dynamic, I think judges need education.
Right, and see, that's another thing. That's one of the things that Disability Rights of California is saying. We don't really want to go down the avenue of debating whether we need legislation or not around this. We need to be looking at education and educating everybody, educating medical providers, educators, people that work in service delivery to people with disabilities, the legal people, and all of that, so that it can be more informed and people are more aware. You're absolutely right. Yes, Sharon.
So the question is, being on the program for students who are high functioning, and students that will be in the University of London on that track now.
Right.
And Mom just called about 2 weeks ago and said that she got the limited conservatorship program. He's been involved in a lot of decision-making things on campus, and part of what he does in the program. So, but there were certain components she knew that, like you said, that support was going to be, and they just were able to get the limited, very specific on what she would be able to support him with. You are right, though. It depends on the judge who's hearing the case. I guess he's one that really listens rather than the 5 minutes. He really listens to all the components of it, and your son also presented to. So there are ways, but then it's very specific to the situation, to the student, and to who's overseeing that.
And one of the other things that happens, and it'll be a slide that comes up, but we'll skip over because we'll already be talking about it, is that it's not accurate that regional centers are always involved. They don't always get the phone call that parent A over here wants to conserve their child and they're going forward. And there isn't that checks and balance sign off that is indicated in how the process is supposed to work. So that's a safeguard that's not there. So if regional center were always thinking with the family and at least maybe playing the devil's advocate or whatever, you can look at your decision and be more sure of it, whatever the outcome might be. But that, everybody thinks that happens, but sometimes it just skips that step and goes forward.
I think that regional center is involved. They have to write a letter saying.
They don't have to. We hope that they do.
The 21 regional centers all do things very differently. So
Yeah.
there are some regional centers
Some
who are more supportive of guardianship than others. I work for one that does not participate at all by choice. We are much more in favor as a board and as a agency of the supported decision-making process, where you build natural supports around someone and teach that human to whatever ability they are able to make those decisions rather than legally take away. So we're more inclined, not that we won't write the letter of pass, but my particular regional center would participate significantly less than another regional
I
center.
mean, my understanding is the regional center writes a letter and says, not always in support. They say,
Correct.
If we're
it's
part
an
of it.
evaluation. And so if you're choosing not to write a letter that's not in support, that's kind of, you know, vacating your responsibilities.
We're not always included at all.
Yeah, only if we're informed.
On a link on the agenda.
I guess, kind of on that, I think it might also vary depending on the region.
Yeah.
Because I know the region I'm in, we get nice little letters from our courts that say, why didn't we receive your report? Even if we didn't know that a conservatorship was filed.
Right.
So it may also vary on
Yes,
region
it
because
most
we have to
definitely
follow
does.
the court process.
I believe that there's a piece in Latterman which mandates that while we may not be in support, or regional centers may not be in support or whatever, if a conservatorship is requested, that the regional center will fund the psychological that's involved with the conservatorship. So that could be perceived as support, but I don't think we have a choice on that. At least we have interpreted, and there are 21 regional
Right,
centers,
and that
so
is
we've all
always-
interpreted it differently.
Well,
But
we always
that's what
say
we
California
said.
is so unique, and here's another example, because we have 21 different ways of interpreting policy and what the Lanterman Act, its intentionality in that. But yes, so once again, that's something that we need to consider. This resource that we have up here, the National Guardianship Association, Steve has spent a lot of time looking at their website, talking to people that are connected with it. So once again, it's a really good resource. And the mission of the National Guardian is to they provide education, they provide training, and networking opportunities for people who are guardians.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but every other state in the union refers to what we call conservatorship.
Right, as
a
guardians,
guardianship,
yes. And so once again, Unique California still calls it a conservatorship, but you are right, everybody else calls it guardian. Thank you, that's a very good point. And so they're looking at wanting to promote the highest values and standards and ethics around the topic of conservatorship. And so these are some quotes directly from the Guardian about that supported decision-making should be considered for a person before guardianship, and that supported decision-making process should be incorporated in the guardianship if necessary. So we know we've talked to a lot of groups where there'll be people in the audience that have already made the decision to have their child conserved, and you know, they're feeling like, oh, maybe I should have done things differently. And part of the work of places like the National Guardianship Association are to help families know that, okay, so you've made that decision, you didn't have the same information 10 years ago, 20 years ago that you have now. How is it that you could maybe build in some like person-centered planning thinking, some supported decision-making thinking into how you support your adult with a disability, even if they are conserved. So it's looking at just trying to enhance the value of adults' lives with disabilities. So we really believe in the tenets of supported decision-making and having support around those really tough issues, and we feel that it can happen in both arenas.
One of the things that I think about with supported decision-making, particularly around medical decisions, is almost everybody I know goes to somebody and says, what do you think about this? When there is a tremendous medical issue. I've gone with my husband to medical appointments and nobody's ever said, you gotta get out.
Right.
So, you know, and he's not a regional center function.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so really part of this whole conversation is about normalizing what we all take for granted is a logical way to look at really tough decisions. We can't avoid the aging process. We're all going to age. We're all going to get challenges. We're all going to have tough decisions to make, whether it's for ourselves, our spouses, our children, our parents, whatever it might be, and we ask for help. So why can't we look at how we ask for help for people with disabilities? So California, like most other states, has a legal requirement that when you do make the petition for conservatorship is filed, then the information will be submitted regarding alternatives and reasons why those alternatives are not available. So they think that you're going through, well, we started here, that isn't going to work, we moved to this level, and that's not where we want to be, and now we're at this level, or many steps in between, but that's not always the case. And so once again, that was a harsh reality for those of us that are unraveling what really happens, what information really gets out there. And so here's where we refer, as was said earlier, to the American Bar Association. And in its guide, it clearly identifies the reasons that we all are concerned and what is happening. And there's an extensive checklist that we'll go through, but you can see it as an overview of this slide, that these are all the things that the Bar Association is concerned about. So they have their reasons for concern, and they feel that they can determine if concerns can be addressed by connecting the individual or the family or community resources and then making accommodations to the process. That's what they hope will happen. They hope that it will be not decisions made in isolation, but with decisions made with people who have the information to think about it, have been exposed to the pros and the cons and the consequences and the life stories of what it is that we would want to be more careful about. So you want to ask families, what would it take to get you where you want, or how you envision your child will be living their adult life? What is it that you need to incorporate into that? And finding out, do they have a team? Can they identify really critical people in their lives that they can gather together and think with and help make those decisions? Or are or the answer is no, and then that's where the job starts, is teaching people how to be a team. Who possibly could be in your team? Who are those people that you can think with and do things with? And looking at the strengths of the person, looking at their limitations, looking where they really, you're sure that they can make those decisions. They've shown by the decisions they've made in the past, and so you really kind of feel comfortable, well, that's not an area of worry for me. But you have to take that assessment, like what's working, what's not working, and where does someone need help. And then I know just for myself and other family members that have been working on this ACLU project and now the work at the Mind Institute, we were really surprised about what we didn't know and what got unraveled, and when things weren't going well and what families had been through. So it really is helpful to broaden who you ask the question to. Even though it is a very intimate family decision in the end, what steps you take to do, we encourage people to think as broadly as they can so that they can make the most informed decision as possible. Okay, and another thing that happens is that lots of times people feel really, really comfortable with their decision, but they don't realize that they may not be the person forever that gets to make those decisions. And so that's a really kind of sort of was shocking piece of information to me, because I thought, okay, I know I'm not going to live forever, and Megan will probably live longer than I do, but I already know who the succession plan is supposed to be, but I never thought that that wouldn't be who it would be. Maybe I would, 10 years from now decide, okay, we should really name someone even if we're still around so that they can start practicing with Megan, making those decisions and what have you. But until I started hearing stories and listening and reading and research, I didn't know that I might not, the way the system works at the moment, have that decision to say that so-and-so who's a chosen family friend that's been with her since 4th grade can be the person that's going to take on that job. So, and one of the things in exploring is helping families know, oftentimes they don't realize all the services that can be available in adulthood, because they've not lived that part of their life yet. And even if they shared a lot of experience with friends that didn't have kids with disabilities, but you all know about sports activities and Girl Scouts and the science club or whatever it might be, when you get to adulthood, the typical families are now onto the college or the employment or the startup company, but people with disabilities may not have ever heard about things like in-home support services that could help with something and provide some of those safeguards. They might not know about SSI and supported employment programs in their community that could be choices. They might not know about ROP programs and workability that can go to 22 and they don't have to, everything just doesn't stop at 18. So people who are doing that great transition work with families have a lot on their shoulders because it's really uncharted territory. And regional center workers who work in the adult units, there are so many things that families don't know because it's not in their everyday vocabulary. So the hope is that they will ask and get more information so their choices will be better. So they talked this morning a little bit about self-determination. That was a topic that came up in the hot topics and what people are doing. And we really believe that the tenets of supported decision-making are tied with that whole concept of self-determination, that they can go hand in hand. And as they said this morning, we too support that. Let's start talking about this at preschool. Let's look at, what are those decisions? How can we support? How can we think bigger? How can we help families when their children get to elementary school to build circles of support for their kids with disabilities? I think that was the best lifeline for my daughter Megan when she was in elementary school, and I ran into her fourth grade teacher here at lunch, and we were talking about circles of support and how that group of circle of friends that got identified in fourth grade that were in Laura's class changed Megan's life, partially because she was an only child and they were convinced that she just did what her mother said all the time because there was nobody to correct me or to question me. And so, like one of the first things one little girl taught her was, and it's so silly now thinking back, but she was like, Megan, you need to learn the word wait. You just don't do it when somebody says it. You just kind of say wait. And then you might still do it, but and then like they had worries about how did she decorate her room? Did it look like a typical fourth grade room, or did it look like something mom was still doing from, started in the nursery and I thought I had that power forever? Or, just being with her or helping her program her communication device or calling her on the weekend and maybe going and doing an activity together. It was pretty isolating for us for a long time. I mean, everybody was nice, but the proximity and opportunities were there. But circle of friends and thinking about a different way to share her really changed our lives as a family. So I'm a big proponent of that. Now you know my bias. Yes?
Circle of Friends is lovely, but a lot of us, are dealing with people that have some serious social skills challenges.
Absolutely.
So that making friendships and having that supportive friendship, it doesn't exist.
That's absolutely true. And I think it happens not only for people on the spectrum, but I also think it happens for people with other neurological disabilities. And that's why we're big proponents at the Mind around social skills and how do you even introduce that concept. And if you think about it, a lot of us, we'd like a whole group of friends, but if you have one good friend or one person that may not be your friend forever, but you can look at that concept of practicing it, because social skills don't come easy, those whole interactions. I mean, my daughter now as an adult has a lot of resiliency issues that come from having ADHD and anxiety trapped in a body with CP, so it's not always a very pretty day, and being able to find people that are in their 30s that want to know that she won't always be quiet, it may not always be the easiest to be, not quiet, always quiet, but her resiliency isn't there, but can be with her, and maybe it's for a short period of time rather than a long period of time. It takes a lot of work, but I think that concept for families, a lot of families just don't ever explore it because they don't think anybody will ever care. So I'm just suggesting that, not that it's always pretty and it's always nice, and or that it is ever easy, but we should at least let families know that it's possible. And sometimes it's in a more formalized, programmed way where it's a nice thing, but it doesn't generalize to somebody calling you on a Friday and saying, my family's going for pizza, will you come? I mean, really, I can probably count on one hand the number of times Megan ever got invited anywhere, but people would come if we invited them. So it was like a lot of work on our part, but my point is just that it's a possibility that sometimes families isolate themselves from that was more it. But I agree with you that it is the hardest thing, because you can find the right math curriculum, you can find the right this, find the right that, but you can't make friendships.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say, I have a daughter with disabilities and autism who is 19, and so she had friends through elementary school, but as soon as teens, she's a good girl, as soon as teen girls start growing up,
Oh, right.
the friendships go away because they're trying to find who they are.
Absolutely.
And so while we went for inclusion and hoping that that circle of support in the community would be there, what her world has contracted to is a social skills group, which are all people that have disabilities and social skills challenges, and her transition program, which again are all people that have disabilities and challenges. Where is a circle of support being built when the people that you end up being friends with because of the realities of our world aren't any better able to advise or help someone make decisions?
Right, because they're just too busy taking care of trying to be who they are supposed to be in life, and they have no extra. And I think it is the hardest challenge for us as family members too, because it's painful. Like, I think about the friends in my world and how I would be so lost without them, and I'm always wanting there to be a longer list with Megan, or even people that I know really care about her. They've moved on, they're married, they have kids, they don't live in Sacramento near we do anymore. They'll send a Christmas card and that's joyful, but they're not going to be there to go get a sandwich after church or whatever. So I think that's a constant search, and you're absolutely right. You have it.
So I run a Circle of Friends program at the high school where I work, and a big part of it is I pair with my program specialist this year, but for the past 9 years I was doing speech therapy, and I paired the social skills training in speech therapy with generalizing into a natural setting with the Circle of Friends program, and training the peers to know how to build in those natural supports, and sometimes friendships would evolve outside of school, and sometimes they wouldn't. It doesn't always happen, but it was, it's been successful in my experience.
So we talked earlier about looking at capacity, and oftentimes it's not, families don't understand that whole concept of the range of capacity and how limited conservatorship or supported decision making can be a better option than a full conservatorship. So walking through and asking these kinds of questions, how do we measure it? Like, can they make some decisions? What topics can they make decisions around? What is something that they'll never get a grasp of? Oftentimes it's the financial piece, that's where they need the most help with. But helping to know that it's not flat across the board, that making decisions is a learned skill, and we need to explore all the parts of it in order for us to know where they are on that range of capacity. And so for those children on the spectrum that will be going to college and maybe in getting a sound job in that, let's look at what is it that we're sure that they can do on their own, and where are the pockets that they still need help with, and how are we going to build in those kinds of support, and what does the team need to ask each other. And this was what we talked about earlier about, not everybody's ready at 18 to have those answers, or haven't had enough life experiences to know.
Well, and most 18.
Right, that's
so
what
it's not just, this one population. Most 18-year-olds couldn't answer these questions.
Because when we've talked in groups, somebody will say, they'll raise their hand and say, my child claim to be typical, you know, I would not have been able to make that assessment at 18, nor would they. And it's very, very, very true.
Which lends weight to waiting.
Right,
Because
yes,
I think
that's
any of
what
us
we
want
really
to
hope.
send our 18-year-olds out into the world. I mean, if this were an option for all people, at the
Right.
age of 18, we might all make this decision
Right.
related to our 18-year-olds.
Right, and I think that's the hard thing. I mean, I think it's hard to ask families to make decisions when they've been in an environment where some things really work well in education. I mean, the saddest day was leaving the education system because I'd been a teacher in the past. I knew that system well. I knew what inclusion looked like. I knew what I wanted. But then you give me this whole realm of adulthood that I had to learn, and all these different agencies, and what would be the best, and how would our community look like, and which avenue you take. There's a lot to think about, and you're leaving something that is more safe than what you're going to because it's unknown. It may become that you make really good choices and you look back and say, I did my homework and it's good, but it's still a process of that. So I'm going to skip kind of quickly because as always we'll run out of time, and I don't want that to happen. So we, you know, in the slide it just talks about what the research tells us about the benefits and what we see as problematic with people that go through the self-determination process or do not. So, and then here's the slide we've already talked about, that we all agree that we all get help in our lives with the hard decisions and the tough decisions. So thinking that a team of support could be helpful for an individual with disability makes sense to us, that that would be how you get those answers that you're looking for. So the research also tells us that these are some of the benefits and things that we believe happen when supported decision making is used, and that they understand that like everything isn't just ABC. I have a problem, I make a decision, here's the consequence. That there's avenues and branches and ways things that go. There are more options than just a linear approach to life. So, and you know, that having people really listen to what's being said and communicate those options is really important. This next slide we've talked about is about building those circles of support and who might be in them. And so then here comes the question about whether it should be formalized or not. And I mentioned earlier that when we talk to our colleagues at Disability Rights, they're really not looking to wanting to have legislation around it, and that they're more looking at getting and maybe down the road that will change, because we will see, just like Texas did as a state that felt when it was formalized, it happened more and it was more streamlined process. But they would like us to look at putting our energy first into educating people. So this is why we were really excited to be invited to Captain, because we know that you will live and work with people that are thinking about these things and considering them, and that we can start spreading what we believe about honoring people's choices. And then the next few slides, I'm not going to go through them because you can read them, but they are all about a sample that Steve added to the PowerPoint of how, if you were interested in making a supported decision-making agreement and plan, he gives you samples that are how you could do that, just so that you have a starting point to consider. Not that these are the only style that could be used or the only things, but just a sample of one way that it can be done. And so we're not saying it's the only way, we just wanted to show you what it might look like. And then it also, there's a caveat in here where it has the person talk about what the team or can and cannot get involved in. Like there's certain areas that maybe they don't want any help around, and others that they know they can't make the decision without other people weighing in. So there's ways to put that in writing. So I'm not going to go through them all, but I want to go to the last page and just talk for a second before we have a few minutes for questions, is about the resources, and we've talked about some of them that Steve put together as places that you can go back and explore and think about and talk to each other about. On the UC Davis Mind website, if you go to the topic of supported decision making, we have started making some videos. Some were made just at the Mind Institute, the one around medical decision making, but then we have a series of 4 others that we did in conjunction with ACLU and people from San Francisco State University, and that just talk about the concept. And there are family voices that are woven in. There are medical professionals and that talk about, the really hard medical decisions and what it's like in a hospital when you're trying to get people to weigh in on those decisions. So if you have time, take a look at them, and there will be more that we are adding, but the first few are up, and there's some other resources around it. We're just beginning to add to that website. And then, as we said, we've talked a lot about ACLU. They have a lot of resources on their website. The American Bar Institute and the National Guardian Association has great resources as well. So I thank you for your time and your attention. And we have about 5 minutes if there are questions I didn't get to that you want to ask the group or ask me. Yes?
I was just wondering when you talked about having conservatorship. My population I work with would be the group that would be much more significant concerns, often behavioral, self-injurious, often nonverbal, kids with young adults that are extremely involved.
Yes.
So when they are conserved, I think that there was an assumption that at a certain point the parent then could, in another process, establish somebody else, and you're saying the courts would be the ones to decide
In some
who the
cases,
conservator is, and the parents would not have input into that.
That has been the stories that have been told to us, that it is arranged. There are some people that will go before the court and say, so I no longer can, I'm aging, whatever, or have a health issue that allows me not to be so right on, and I would like so-and-so. And it happens, and it's, signed, sealed, that becomes the successor conservator is what it's called. But there are stories that we have heard, stories that the ACLU has shared with us, stories that families and family forums have said where they've gone back because they've gotten divorced, or they've gone back because someone's sick, and tried to do that, and the court said, okay, you've done your duty, and now we are going to court appoint someone to oversee your child's decisions, and they are not connected to the family or team. So it's not, I'm not saying it happens every time either way, but that was something that people really didn't know about.
And there's not a way to prevent that?
No.
So the court they have people like court appointed people that's their job, is to be a conservator for someone who's saying, the whole family is gone and there's nobody that comes forward. Or for perhaps a family that knows their child needs to be conserved but has no one to ask, or has asked a slew of people, and they say, no, I don't want to take that job on. They can ask the court for that. So there are paid people that do that, right? And sometimes regional centers, right? Not anymore.
So the Office of Public Guardian, think of people who need adult protective services protection, or child protective services until they, now they're exiting out of that system.
Right.
So the Office of Public Guardian is managing a broader range of individuals, and they may very well have a caseload that is too large, just like every one of our other helping professionals.
Absolutely. Correct. Yes, Cindy.
So this seems pretty complex to me to have these discussions with someone about making their decisions, because it's hard enough with your typical kids when they're adults to have those discussions. They don't want you,
right,
involved so much, which is good. We were supposed to be raising them to be independent, and kids with developmental disabilities, it's the same thing. I mean, they may have the same mindset, but so to have those conversations, I think, would be helpful for training. So that you didn't overstep in those conversations, or that you had a way to introduce options without being too obvious which one.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and that is the hope of a lot of the people that I've mentioned in this slide, that that's what they want to do. And part of this grant that we got at the Mind Institute, there will be trainings through Disability Rights of California. We will be training with Family Resource Centers. We will train with disability rights, with the DD Council in their regional offices, and that, trying to help build a toolbox so that people can get that information. And you know, it's sort of, it's developing as we go, because we really didn't know what a need there was, and how little, when you brought people together, like transition and above, have not had a lot of experience or have misconceptions of what it is, or they've been told something and they don't challenge it because it seems logical, and so, okay, I'm just following that box that I was told I need to present to families. So unraveling what isn't working, discovering what does work, and blending that together is what we're trying to do. But you are absolutely right. I mean, it's going to be practicing. Yes. No, go ahead.
One comment, parents with power of attorney for medical, and then there's an appendicitis, and they get to the hospital, and it just turns into a huge crisis. They don't recognize the power of attorney,
Right.
so then they run off to get the conservatorship.
Absolutely, there are all these things that trigger really decisions that need to be given so much more time and so much more thought. But you're in a crisis, or you're afraid that the person that you love isn't going to get what they need, so you make the decision. And so, and we're really trying to help those families that are in that situation too, of how can it be more livable for everybody. Yes.
I'm sort of new to this older population, but what I was wondering if the conservatorship can be, after you get the initial conservatorship, if the person matures and you decided as the conservator that they can now make some of these decisions, you can go back to court?
Yeah. You can go back to court, and so many people will tell you that's what one of the beliefs that families have. Like, okay, so what I thought at 18 and now at 29, they look very differently. And on one of the videos that's on the website, there's a mom that speaks to this, and it breaks my heart every time I watch it, because her child has so much more capacity than he did, and really blossomed. Like, you know, those were the years in his 20s where he became someone, and she went back and and so and she can't undo it, and she talks about it in the video. And so yes, there may be places where it does happen, but it's not a given as so many people thought. So once again, it's just, can we look at it from a broader perspective?
And I think too, imagining an 18-year-old, any 18-year-old, when their loved ones are saying, we're going to pursue this process, they might not have the capacity or just the forethought to think about the implications for themselves.
Right.
No 18-year-old, I think, would think all the way through those consequences. Right. And they don't have the capacity to self-advocate. Many don't.
Absolutely.
Or effectively self-advocate. So loved ones are consulting with lawyers, they're getting lawyers on board. Who is the advocate for this 18-year-old
right.
and their capacity for growth?
Absolutely.
And it should be the regional center case manager.
No,
if the
or
regional center's involved.
appoints an attorney to the client if they want to contest the conservatorship.
Yeah, but they might not know, but they might not have, they might be along for the ride. Many 18-year-olds or young adults, they're
and the
for
other
the
thing
ride.
that is happening a lot that we hear stories about is, think about children that you know that are in their adults with disabilities now that are in their 20s and 30s who didn't have communication devices or the technology. So there was a lot of capacity locked in that never had a channel to get out. And now that the world has changed and they have a voice in their world, then that's a whole nother situation that brings a lot of heartache and a lot of how can we redo and how can we act. Yes?
There are also some post-secondary programs that will not accept students if they are conserved in any area.
Absolutely,
so
too.
Parents need to be aware of that too, because they could be great
supportive
programs for the
living.
kids.
Your mom's got to sign your rental agreement. Your mom's got to get your deposit for your electricity.
Right.
Like we're as parents, we're worried about the appendicitis, but we're not thinking
Correct.
of every legality we just signed on for and took away from our child to have that opportunity, that experience.
Yes.
Check on the conservators.
There isn't one. I mean, there's technically
actually,
So
no, people check.
You're investigating.
Yes, like, anything, once again, California is a big state, where you live, under what county court system, you're in, it's gonna look different. So sometimes it's yearly, sometimes it's every other year. Oftentimes it's not the same person because there's turnover, so it's not a consistent person looking at, oh, I saw them in 2015, this is what it looked like. It's maintaining and doing well, but there is a provision for that.
So naturally, if somebody saw an adult, or somebody who they thought was an adult was being mistreated, they would probably call adult protective services.
Correct.
Do they have communication that way? I mean, they don't necessarily know they're conserved, so is there like a check pathway?
One of the issues that I've seen with it is that it might be in this catchment area is 9 counties. So the person might be conserved out of Butte County, and in Tehama County is where the individual and their conservator live. And so really Butte County isn't going to be notified about the abuse that Tehama County has seen. And I've also seen it where the regional center's been asked, what do you think about this person becoming the conservator? And we said, not a good idea. And proves they're the conservator. Or we've contacted the court investigator and said, this is what we're seeing. We've made all these reports. Here are these reports that we've sent to ADS. They're still conservators.
Tiny percentage gets called up. 75 to 90%, we have no knowledge about at all.
Okay.
There's a listserv can do, Norvell Dorian puts it out, and it has, I'm gonna say, 80 incidences every week. A large portion of them are financial by employees and by services.
Do you still have a question? We can do one more, and then I'm gonna let it go. People.
Well, yeah, one of my questions is around, honestly, the ability, one of the barriers sometimes for conservatorship beyond all that we're talking about is financially. It costs a lot of money to get your individual conserved. I've known parents who held off and then they find themselves in a position where they're not allowed to, say, make this medical decision. They didn't have their individual conserved. Or guardian, or, so there's other alternatives. So we have to look at these other alternatives because if I couldn't afford a couple $1,000, I was going to get too rich for that.
Right.
So I don't
That is another barrier.
So, just wanted to acknowledge that when we started talking about lawyers cost money.
Right.
But I know my son was conservative because he wanted to add light of it. So he had his own court-appointed person to do the investigation of that. But as the parent, I also need somebody to help me with that process and take it.
So I apologize that we ran over, but I really appreciate all your input and your thinking with us. And once again, and you have our contact information. If there's something you're driving home and you think, oh, I wish I had asked, don't hesitate.